Morning light barely reached the lower levels of Allegheny General Hospital when Natalie Ruiz stepped into the surgical wing, already feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee, the kind of scent that clung to long shifts and sleepless nights. She had hoped, foolishly, for even a moment of quiet before things unraveled. Instead, she heard the sharp click of heels behind her, fast, purposeful, irritated. Dolores Manning, the charge nurse, appeared at the end of the hallway with a clipboard pressed to her chest and a tight, disapproving frown. Natalie felt herself brace instinctively, the way someone might flinch before a door slams. "So," Dolores said, not bothering with a greeting, "you're leaving early again." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in professional politeness, just thin enough to satisfy HR, but sharp enough to cut. Natalie kept her voice steady. "I told you yesterday. I have a court appointment." Dolores scoffed. "You always have something, don't you? A father to take to appointments, a neighbor needing help, and now a divorce hearing." She shook her head slowly, savoring each word. "If you can't manage your personal life, Natalie, maybe you should reconsider working in a department that relies on people being present." The words hit harder than they should have, mostly because there was no room in Natalie's life for more failure. She swallowed. "I'll finish everything before I go." Dolores waved her off. "Just go before shift change. I don't have time for excuses." She turned, muttering something under her breath, but Natalie caught enough. Unreliable, always needing time off, always something with her. Natalie let out a breath she had been holding for days. The divorce hearing wasn't optional. Daniel had made that clear. He wanted the apartment, her apartment, the one her father had sacrificed nearly everything to buy for her. The thought sent a tightness through her chest. She had barely slept, worrying about what she might lose by noon today. And then there was her father. Miguel Ruiz had once been strong enough to lift drywall with one arm, but the construction accident had taken much of that strength from him. Now he relied on a manual wheelchair and on Natalie for nearly everything else. She carried the guilt the way other people carried backpacks, daily, heavily, without complaint. The long shifts, the low pay, the exhaustion, none of it scared her as much as failing him. Natalie headed toward the supply room, trying to steady her breath. She needed to stay focused, but her mind kept circling back to the courthouse downtown, to the judge, to Daniel's expression the last time she saw him. Smug, confident, certain he'd walk away with half of everything. She wasn't sure what frightened her more, losing the apartment or discovering there was nothing left inside her to fight with. This morning felt like a beginning she never wanted, a day already slipping out of her control. And yet she kept moving because there was no other choice. Not for someone like her. Natalie's thoughts drifted as she stocked supplies, her hands moving automatically while her mind wandered somewhere far from the fluorescent lights and narrow corridors. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't push away the image of her father sitting in his battered manual wheelchair, the rubber on one wheel worn nearly flat from years of use. Miguel Ruiz had never been a man who asked for much. For decades, he worked on construction crews across Pittsburgh, framing houses, pouring concrete, climbing scaffolding in the dead of winter. Then one day, a support beam failed. The fall shattered more than bone. It ended the life he had built with his hands. Since the accident, he'd relied on Natalie the way he once relied on his own strength. She watched him struggle each time he tried to turn the wheels himself, breathing hard, trying not to let her see how much it hurt. Still, whenever she mentioned getting a newer chair, he waved it off with a tired smile. "If I ever could," he once told her, "I'd save enough for one of those electric wheelchairs, the kind that actually lets a man feel like he's moving somewhere again." But disability checks didn't stretch far, and Natalie's paycheck barely covered rent, groceries, and the steady stream of medical appointments. So the dream stayed Just that, a dream Miguel never pressed her about, and one Natalie carried like a quiet stone in her chest. Balancing work and caregiving had slowly drained her over the years. She'd race between shifts and doctor visits, between late-night cleaning and early morning bus rides, always telling herself she could handle more. It was easier than admitting she was stretched to the point of breaking. And Daniel, once the man she believed would share the burden, had begun pulling away long before she understood why. In the early years, he was affectionate, attentive, proud of the way she cared for her father. But as his job began sending him out of town more often, something in him changed. He became distant, irritated by small things, impatient with conversations, disappearing behind hotel doors and long business trips. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't supportive enough. Maybe she worked too much. But the truth had been simpler and far more painful. Daniel wasn't traveling for work. He was traveling to escape her, or to be with someone else. Even now, thinking about it made her stomach tighten. The man she had trusted, the man she'd built a life with, had turned cold long before divorce papers ever surfaced. And now, unbelievably, he might walk away with half of the apartment, a place Miguel had spent nearly his entire savings to secure for her, wanting her to have stability he never had. Legally, the property was in both their names. Emotionally, it wasn't even a question. It was her father's sacrifice, and the idea of losing it didn't just frighten her. It hollowed her out. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that everyone else had seen it long before she did. Natalie remembered the exact moment her marriage cracked open. It had been an ordinary evening. She was folding laundry while Daniel packed for yet another business trip. His phone buzzed on the dresser. A message flashed across the screen, just long enough for her to catch the words, "Can't wait to see you again." She froze. Her breath stalled. The feeling was sharp cold, almost clinical, like watching her own life from behind glass. When she confronted him, Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't scramble for excuses or attempt to soften the blow. He just exhaled, almost relieved, and said, "I didn't think you'd find out this way." No apology, no regret, just the confirmation that the man she'd loved had been stepping out of their marriage for years. Later, when she spoke to people who had known them, friends from work, neighbors, even one of her own acquaintances, there was always the same hesitant shrug, the same quiet admission. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you." It was meant to sound gentle. To her it felt cruel, as if she had been the only one living inside a story that everyone else already knew the ending to. The divorce papers came quickly after that. She filed first, her hands trembling as she signed her name, determined not to let him be the one to choose when the marriage ended. But Daniel reacted with a calm sense of entitlement, as if everything she had built, everything her father had worked years to give her, was his by default. "The apartment was bought after we married," he told her plainly. "It's marital property. I have a right to half." She remembered staring at him, stunned. "My father paid for it. All of it. Every dollar." Daniel only shrugged. "Then he gifted it to both of us." That moment had carved something out of her. Not anger. Something heavier, more permanent. A kind of exhaustion that lived in her bones. By the time she left the hospital that morning for her hearing, she felt hollowed out. The wind outside slapped at her cheeks as she stepped onto the sidewalk, hugging her jacket tighter around her. Her feet carried her toward the bus stop almost on instinct. The city moved as usual around her. Cars honking, buses rumbling past, strangers hurrying to jobs and appointments. Meanwhile, she felt suspended between the life she had tried to build and the one unraveling beneath her. Her chest tightened as she waited for the bus. She was already worn out emotionally, and the day had barely begun. Ahead of her was a courtroom, a soon-to-be ex-husband, and the terrifying possibility that she might walk out with nothing. And still, she forced herself to keep going, because there was no other choice. The bus screeched to a stop at the corner of Federal Street, its doors folding open with a tired hiss. Natalie stepped inside and was swallowed almost immediately by the crush of bodies packed shoulder to shoulder. The midday rush always hit hard around the North Shore. Hospital employees heading out for lunch breaks, students shuttling between classes, downtown workers darting between meetings. Today, the bus felt even tighter, as if the air itself resisted her attempts to breathe. She grabbed the nearest handrail, steadying herself as the bus lurched forward. Her mind drifted again toward the courthouse downtown, toward the judge, toward Daniel's smug certainty. Her nerves vibrated beneath her skin, a quiet trembling no one else could see. A sharp voice cut through the hum of the engine. "Sir, you need to pay your fare. Now." At the center of the aisle stood a fair inspector in a bright vest, blocking the path of an elderly man in worn clothes and scuffed shoes. The man clutched his thin coat with both hands, his eyes wide behind cloudy glasses. I thought my senior pass was enough," he stammered. "This route isn't covered by discounted passes," the inspector snapped. "You either pay or you get off." Passengers nearby turned away, staring into their phones or out windows, pretending not to hear. No one wanted to get pulled into someone else's misfortune. And Natalie, who had more than enough of her own, should have looked away too. But she couldn't. The old man's hands trembled as he searched through empty pockets. His breathing grew shallow and frantic. Something inside her tightened. That small voice her father had raised her with, the one that insisted kindness wasn't optional. Natalie shifted forward. "I'll cover his fare." The inspector blinked. "You will?" "Yes." She pulled a crumpled bill from her wallet. "Here." The inspector snatched it without gratitude and stepped aside. The man's shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you," he murmured, voice soft and shaky. "People don't usually stop." Natalie offered a tired smile. "It's all right." But he continued studying her face, his expression sharpening with gentle concern. "You look troubled, dear. Forgive me for asking, but are you all right?" The back of her throat tightened. She didn't plan to answer, but something about his tone, quiet, patient, sincere, disarmed her. "I'm heading to divorce court," she said, "and I'm scared I'm about to lose my home." The man nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight behind her words, a heavy burden to carry alone. The bus rattled over a pothole, and Natalie steadied herself again, gripping the rail. Alone. That was exactly how she felt. She didn't know yet, couldn't possibly know, that the man she had just helped would soon step into her life in a way that changed everything. The Allegheny County Family Court was colder than Natalie expected, the kind of cold that settled in the bones rather than on the skin. She stepped through the metal detector, her hands slightly damp, her stomach churning. Outside, buses and sirens echoed down Grant Street, but inside everything felt muted, swallowed by marble walls and fluorescent lights. Daniel was already there. He stood near the courtroom doors in a crisp suit she hadn't seen before, speaking quietly with a man who could only be his attorney, polished, confident, flipping through neatly organized folders. Daniel glanced up as she approached. The look he gave her wasn't cruel. It was worse, detached, as if she were just another line item in a long checklist he expected to breeze through. Natalie found an empty seat in the front row, her pulse thudding in her ears. She had no lawyer, no folder of evidence, no one on her side, just the hope that the truth would somehow be enough. It never felt like it was. When the clerk finally called their case, Natalie rose on unsteady legs and followed Daniel to the front. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair pinned tightly at the back of her head, scanned the documents Daniel's attorney handed her. Natalie tried to read the judge's expression, but her face revealed nothing. The attorney spoke first, smooth, rehearsed, confident. He outlined Daniel's position. The apartment was marital property, titled in both spouses' names, purchased during the marriage. As he spoke, Natalie felt the room shrink around her. Every sentence pushed her closer to the edge of losing everything. When the judge turned to her, she searched for words but found only fragments. "My father paid for the apartment," she managed. "All of it. He saved for years. Daniel didn't contribute." The judge raised a hand. "Mrs. Ruiz, unless you can provide documented proof of the source of funds, the court must proceed based on ownership records." Her tone was not unkind, but it was firm, almost final. Natalie felt a sinking, suffocating drop in her chest. This was it. She was about to lose the only home she and her father had left. And then, from the back row, a voice called out, "Your Honor, if I may." Natalie turned. Her breath caught. It was the elderly man from the bus. He stepped forward with surprising steadiness, though his clothes were still worn and his hands trembled slightly. But when he spoke again, his voice carried a clarity that cut clean through the courtroom. "There appears to be a procedural deficiency," he said, addressing the judge with the ease of someone who had stood in court many times before. "The respondent has failed to provide documentation verifying financial contribution toward the contested property. Without that, equitable distribution cannot proceed according to Pennsylvania law." Daniel's attorney stiffened. The judge leaned forward. "And you are?" "Anthony Blake, Your Honor. Formerly licensed with the Pennsylvania Bar Association." A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. Anthony continued, outlining the missing documents with precise legal terminology, citing rules Natalie had never heard before. The judge listened carefully, very carefully. After a long moment, she closed the file. "This hearing will be postponed," she ruled. "Both parties are to return with complete financial documentation. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. Natalie's knees nearly gave out with relief. She turned to Anthony, tears welling before she could stop them. He offered a gentle nod. "You didn't lose today," he said softly. She stepped forward and hugged him, grateful, trembling, overwhelmed, because for the first time in months, the ground beneath her feet felt steady again. Outside the courthouse, the noise of downtown Pittsburgh carried across the steps, buses groaning up the hill, car horns echoing off stone buildings, fragments of conversations floating past like loose threads. But Natalie barely heard any of it. Her heartbeat was still slowing, her breath unsteady as she tried to process what had just happened. Anthony Blake stood beside her, hands folded gently in front of him, his expression calm but distant, as though he had drifted somewhere far beyond the courthouse plaza. "Thank you," she said softly. The words felt too small for what he had done. "I don't know how to even begin repaying you." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." But there was a heaviness beneath his voice, a gravity that hinted at years of carrying something alone. They walked toward the sidewalk, moving slowly, neither of them rushing the silence. Natalie finally asked the question that had lingered in her mind since the moment he spoke in court. "You said you were formally licensed. What happened?" Anthony paused. His eyes followed a pair of pigeons scattering across the plaza before he answered. "I used to practice law here in Pittsburgh," he said quietly. "Criminal defense. I was good at it. Maybe too good, in the sense that I believed work could hold my whole world together." He exhaled, the sound worn around the edges. "But life doesn't always respect the things you try to build." He told her about the car accident, how his wife and son were on their way home from a weekend trip, how a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, how everything he loved disappeared in an instant. The way he said it was steady, almost practiced, but his eyes carried a grief that had never softened. "After that, I stopped functioning the way a person should," he continued. "Stopped showing up to court, missed deadlines, let clients down. I lost my license, then my savings, then my home, and eventually myself, I suppose." Natalie felt something tighten in her chest, not pity, but recognition. the feeling of a life collapsing in slow motion, leaving no safe place to stand. "I'm so sorry," she murmured. He nodded, offering a small, broken smile. Grief doesn't excuse everything, but it explains how quickly a life can unravel. They reached the bus stop, where she hesitated before speaking again. "You don't have anywhere to stay tonight, do you?" Anthony didn't answer immediately, but the silence was enough. Natalie steadied herself. "I'm renting a small apartment near Lawrenceville. I'm only there in the evenings, and it's empty during the day. Until the next court date, please stay there. It's safe. It's warm. And you helped me today more than anyone has in years." Anthony blinked as though caught off guard. "Natalie, I couldn't possibly. I insist." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he gave a slow, humbled nod, one that carried gratitude deeper than words could reach. "Thank you," he whispered. "Truly." The wind brushed past them, soft and cold, as the bus pulled in, and for the first time in a long time, both of them stepped forward with something that felt almost like hope. The sliding doors of Allegheny General Hospital opened with their usual soft chime, but to Natalie, the air inside felt heavier than it had that morning. She'd barely stepped into the surgical wing before Dolores Manning spotted her. The charge nurse's eyes narrowed instantly, sharpening like glass. "Well, look who finally decided to show up!" Dolores snapped, crossing her arms tightly across her scrubs. "Enjoy your little outing? Must be nice having all this free time while the rest of us keep this place running." Natalie swallowed. "I told you I had a court hearing. I came back as fast as I could." "I am not interested in your personal drama," Dolores cut in. "Your excuses are becoming a daily ritual." The word stung, but Natalie didn't respond. Not today. She was too raw, too drained. She headed toward the staff locker room, trying to steady her breathing. But something about Dolores's energy felt wrong. Charged, jittery, almost frantic. Moments later, an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Administrative compliance team to surgical floor C." Natalie froze. Across the hall, Dolores visibly blanched. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her uniform, and for the first time that day, she avoided meeting anyone's gaze. The inspection team arrived quickly. 3 administrators with tablets, badge lanyards swinging as they moved with purpose. Their tone was clipped official. They asked to review inventory logs, medication access records, storage cabinets. Nurses whispered. Orderlies watched from a distance. Tension coiled through the ward like a drawn wire. Dolores hovered nervously near the medication room, smiling too brightly, speaking too quickly. Natalie had seen that expression before, on patients who knew their test results wouldn't be good. She stepped into the locker room to put away her things. But as soon as she opened her locker, she froze. Inside, tucked neatly on top of her folded sweatshirt, lay several empty packaging sleeves from controlled medications, the very type the inspection team was searching for. Her heart lurched violently. No, this isn't mine," she whispered, touching nothing. Behind her, footsteps approached. One of the compliance officers appeared in the doorway, another administrator just behind him. "Ms. Ruiz," he said carefully, "we need to ask you about something unusual found in your locker." Natalie shook her head immediately. "Those aren't mine. I don't even have access to those medications." Dolores appeared in the hallway, her expression arranged into perfect disappointment. "Well," she said with a heavy sigh, "I've had my concerns for a while, but I never imagined it would go this far." Natalie stared at her, shock spreading like ice beneath her ribs. "You know this isn't true." Dolores only lifted her brows, as if heartbroken by betrayal. The administrators exchanged looks. "Until we complete our investigation," the lead officer said, "you are being placed on administrative leave. You'll receive written notice by the end of the day. Please collect your things." The room seemed to tilt. Natalie's pulse hammered in her ears as she nodded mechanically, unable to trust her voice. She stepped out of the ward in a daze, passing the busy hallway, the ringing phones, the murmur of staff who suddenly seemed miles away. By the time she pushed through the exit doors, tears blurred the world around her. In one day, she had nearly lost her home. Now, she had lost her job, at least for a while. And as she walked into the cold afternoon air, devastation settled over her like a weight she no longer knew how to carry. By the time Natalie stepped out of the hospital, the afternoon sky had dulled into a flat gray, the kind that made Pittsburgh feel colder than it really was. Her mind was still reeling from the administrative leave notice when her phone began buzzing violently in her pocket. She almost didn't answer until she saw the caller ID. Her landlord. She picked up. "Hi, Mrs. Klein." A furious voice exploded through the speaker. "Natalie Ruiz. Who is the man in my apartment? Who did you give my keys to? I walk in for a routine check, and there's a strange older man sitting on the couch like he owns the place." Natalie's stomach dropped. "Wait, Mrs. Klein, please, I can explain." I've already called the police," the landlord snapped. "You can explain it to them. This is completely unacceptable." Completely. The line went dead. Natalie stood frozen on the sidewalk for a full second before her body finally caught up to her fear. She ran toward the bus stop, breath sharp, legs trembling. Today had already chewed her down to the bone. This felt like the final blow. By the time she reached the police station on Butler Street, she was breathless, bracing herself for the worst. Anthony in handcuffs, accusations flying, another disaster she couldn't fix. But when she pushed open the lobby doors, the scene she expected simply wasn't there. Anthony sat comfortably on a bench near the reception counter, talking with a young officer in navy blue uniform. The officer, a tall man with warm brown eyes and an easy posture, was actually smiling. Natalie blinked, unsure she was seeing correctly. Anthony noticed her first. "Natalie, you made it." "Officer Lucas," Grant turned toward her. "You must be Ms. Ruiz." She exhaled shakily. "Yes. Please tell me he's not in trouble. The landlord called." She sounded ready to evict me on the spot. Lucas shook his head gently. "No charges. No citation. Nothing like that." He looked back at Anthony with something like fondness. "I know this man. My mentor in the academy was his son's partner. Mr. Blake used to visit the precinct all the time years ago. When the call came in, I recognized his name immediately." Anthony lowered his gaze, embarrassed but relieved. "I wasn't trying to cause problems. Your landlord just walked in unexpectedly." Lucas continued. "I explained everything to Mrs. Klein. She wasn't happy, but once she understood there was no break-in, she agreed not to pursue it further. She'll call you tomorrow to arrange a new key policy." Natalie's knees loosened with relief. She stepped closer to Anthony. "I'm so sorry you got dragged into this." He shook his head. "No, I'm sorry. After everything you've done for me, the last thing I wanted was to cause more trouble." Lucas offered a small, reassuring nod. "He's safe, and you're not in any legal danger." For the first time since leaving the hospital, Natalie felt her lungs fill completely. The day was still heavy, still painful, but at least this one disaster had quietly unraveled itself. And for the first time, she wondered if Officer Grant's presence in this moment meant more than simple coincidence. Lucas led them out of the lobby and into a quieter hallway lined with bulletin boards and old precinct photos. The noise of radios and ringing phones faded behind them, giving the moment a strange hush. Anthony walked slowly, his posture tired but steady, while Natalie hovered at his side, her nerves still frayed. "I can take him home with me," Lucas said gently as they stopped near the rear exit. "At least until the situation with your landlord settles. I live alone. Plenty of space. And honestly, it would be good to have someone around who actually remembers the academy before it went digital. Anthony chuckled softly, though his eyes remained warm. You may regret extending that invitation, Officer Grant. I talk too much. Lucas shook his head. No such thing as too much when it comes to stories from people who've lived real life. Natalie watched the exchange with relief pulling at her chest. But the moment Lucas turned back to her, the fragile composure she'd been holding all day snapped. Words tumbled out of her, halting, desperate, edged with exhaustion. She told him everything. The surprise inspection at the hospital, the planted drug packaging, Dolores's sudden shift from hostility to false concern. The administrative leave that felt like a quiet accusation. By the time she finished, her voice had thinned to a whisper. Lucas listened without interrupting, his expression tightening with each detail. When she finished, he exhaled sharply, the line of his jaw hardening. This wasn't incompetence, he said. This was a setup, a deliberate one. Natalie nodded, tears burning her eyes. I've never even touched those medications. I don't have the access to. I know. Lucas's voice softened. And if you didn't have access, someone who did put them there. Anthony rested a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this, Natalie. Lucas straightened. I'm opening an investigation. Natalie blinked. But it's a hospital matter, not police. I'm not filing a case yet, he clarified. I'm gathering evidence. I can walk in as a patient under the hospital's charity care program. No one questions those admissions. I can monitor supply rooms, track access logs, and place hidden cameras in the medication inventory areas. Natalie stared at him, stunned. You do that? For me? Lucas's answering smile was small but sincere. For justice, and because you shouldn't lose your career over someone else's theft. Before she could respond, Anthony spoke, his voice low and knowing. Lucas, he said, almost in a fatherly tone, when this is over, make sure you see Natalie as more than a file to fix. He paused, eyes twinkling. She's someone worth noticing. Lucas's cheeks reddened faintly, and Natalie looked away, her heartbeat stuttering at the unexpected warmth behind the words. Outside the precinct window, evening light spilled across the street, soft, golden, almost hopeful. For the first time all day, Natalie felt something shift inside her, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the truth was finally moving in her direction. Lucas carried out his plan with quiet precision. 2 days after meeting Natalie, he arrived at Allegheny General Hospital disguised as a charity care patient, shaved face, loose hoodie, cast boot on his ankle, paperwork in hand. No one questioned his admission. No one looked twice when he was rolled onto surgical floor C. Dolores Manning barely glanced at him. Her focus was elsewhere, pacing, snapping at staff, hovering anxiously around the medication room. The compliance team was still auditing their inventory logs. Tension hung over the ward like static. Lucas waited. At night, when hallway traffic thinned and nurses rotated through shifts, he moved. Hidden cameras were placed behind supply crates inside a linen cart. Beneath the medication cabinet's lower shelf, the angles were perfect, the motion sensors sensitive. The truth revealed itself faster than he expected. On the second night, at 11:47 p.m., Dolores slipped into the storage room alone. Lucas watched from his bed as the camera feed streamed to his phone. She opened the controlled access drawer with a stolen code, removed several vials, then pocketed them with quick, practiced movements. Her eyes darted around the room before she tucked the empty packaging into a plastic bag. Lucas didn't need more, but evidence kept coming. 2 more nights, 2 more thefts. One moment that made his jaw clench. Dolores sliding empty drug sleeves into a staff locker identical to Natalie's. He reported everything to the compliance team. By noon the next day, the hospital administration descended on the ward. Doors opened and closed rapidly, voices rose in clipped commands. Nurses whispered, retreating to corners. Dolores tried to maintain her smile, but her face had gone almost chalk white. When administrators escorted her from the medication room, she demanded explanations, then threatened lawsuits, then burst into shaky denial. But when they confronted her with the footage, her shoulders collapsed. She didn't speak again, not even when security guided her toward the exit, her badge removed, hands trembling too violently to hide. Before the day ended, she was arrested. Natalie received the call that afternoon. She had braced herself for another blow, another accusation, another reason to doubt her own strength. Instead, she heard the words she'd been aching for. "Ms. Ruiz, you've been cleared. The evidence shows you were framed. Your position is being fully reinstated." The breath she released felt like the first real exhale in months. She returned to the hospital the following morning. Colleagues who once avoided her now greeted her with soft apologies, relieved smiles, quiet acknowledgments that she had been wronged. The ward felt different, lighter, safer, almost welcoming. And when she stepped out after her shift, the evening light was waiting, and so were two men who had become anchors in the chaos of her life. Anthony and Lucas stood by the curb, both smiling when they saw her. For the first time in a long while, the weight on Natalie's shoulders felt bearable. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. The morning of the final hearing rose clear and cold over downtown Pittsburgh. As Natalie approached the Allegheny County Family Court for the second time, she felt a strange calm settle over her, like the quiet after a storm, when the world stops spinning long enough for a person to breathe. But when she stepped into the marble hallway, she froze. A man stood near the courtroom doors, speaking quietly with a clerk. His posture was straight, steady. His suit, dark, tailored, immaculate, fit as though it had been waiting for this day. His hair was trimmed, his face clean-shaven, his expression composed. It took her a moment to recognize him. Anthony Blake. Not the man she'd met on the bus. Not the man trembling with loss and humiliation. But the attorney he once was, sharp, confident, quietly formidable. He turned when he sensed her presence, and his eyes softened. "Natalie," he greeted. "We're ready." "Your license," she began. "Restored," he said simply. "The bar reviewed my case sooner than expected. It turns out grief can derail a man, but it doesn't erase a lifetime of good work." She felt her throat tighten. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to. Let's just finish what we started." The bailiff called their case. Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat stiffly beside his attorney, who appeared far less relaxed than at the previous hearing. Daniel's eyes flicked between Natalie and Anthony with unease, not fear, but something close. As proceedings began, Anthony rose with measured confidence. His voice was low, but carried effortlessly across the room, each word precise, deliberate. He began by challenging Daniel's documentation, not with aggression, but with the cool authority of someone who had dismantled weak arguments for decades. He pointed out inconsistencies, missing financial records, and improper filings. Then he shifted to the heart of the matter, the apartment, with clear, methodical detail. Anthony presented evidence showing that every dollar used to purchase the property originated from Miguel Ruiz's savings, a lifetime of construction work, meticulously documented bank withdrawals, notarized gift statements, and supporting testimony. Daniel's attorney attempted to counter, but Anthony anticipated every angle. "Marital property," the attorney insisted. "Only when both parties contribute," Anthony replied, calm as steel. "In this case, the contribution is singular and fully traceable." The judge listened intently, hands folded, eyes sharp. Daniel's confidence drained minute by minute, leaving behind only a tightening jaw and the faintest twitch of irritation. When Anthony finished, the room felt different, lighter, as though the truth itself had shifted the air. After a pause, the judge delivered the ruling. The apartment would remain solely in Natalie Ruiz's name. Daniel was ordered to vacate any claims. And, after reviewing the emotional damage inflicted by his actions, the court imposed financial compensation for emotional distress. The gavel fell. Natalie's breath broke on a quiet, stunned exhale. Relief washed through her so powerfully she had to grip the seat to steady herself. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the plaza. She stepped into it slowly, still absorbing the victory she once thought impossible. Lucas was waiting near the steps. He didn't rush to her. He simply lifted his gaze, and the moment their eyes met, something in her chest loosened. Something warm, steady, unmistakably new. "You won," he said softly. "We won," she corrected. Anthony joined them, standing a little apart, pride glowing in his tired but restored eyes. He watched the two younger people, Natalie's quiet smile, Lucas's softened expression, and nodded to himself. A man who had lost everything was now witnessing something beginning. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. Spring arrived quietly in Pittsburgh, softening the sharp edges the past year had carved into Natalie's life. The courthouse battles were over, the hospital investigation resolved, and the constant fear that used to live beneath her ribs had finally eased. What replaced it was something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. At Anthony's gentle encouragement, Natalie enrolled in evening nursing courses at the community college. The work was demanding, the schedule draining, and balancing clinical rotations with caring for Miguel often felt impossible. But she pushed through, fueled by a steady sense that she was finally building a life she deserved. When she graduated and accepted a position at a private outpatient clinic in Shadyside, the difference was immediate. Better hours, better pay, better treatment. For once, she didn't feel invisible. She felt valued. The first purchase she made with her new income was not for herself. It was for Miguel. She brought home the electric wheelchair he had dreamed of for years, a sleek, lightweight model with adjustable controls and enough horsepower to navigate the hilly sidewalks near their apartment. The moment he saw it, Miguel's eyes filled. His fingers traced the armrest as though afraid it might disappear. "Natalie," he whispered, voice cracking, "I never thought." "You don't have to think any more, Papa," she said, kneeling beside him. "You just get to live." For the first time since his accident, Miguel took himself outside, rolling down the street with a freedom that made the neighbors smile. She followed behind him that day, heart full, knowing every sacrifice had been worth it. Months later, on a warm June afternoon, she walked down the aisle of a small garden behind a restored brick chapel in Lawrenceville. White lights shimmered between the trees, and Miguel, sitting proudly in his new chair, escorted her as far as the path allowed. At the end stood Officer Lucas Grant. The ceremony was modest, but perfect. When Lucas took her hands, his voice trembled slightly, steady enough for vows, soft enough to reveal everything he felt. Anthony sat in the front row, dressed in a suit that fit far better than the one he'd worn to court. He watched with quiet pride, his presence no longer the shadowed silhouette of a man who had lost everything, but the steady foundation of someone who had found his place again. After the reception ended and the last guests drifted away, the three of them, Natalie, Lucas, and Miguel, stood together beneath the string lights, joined moments later by Anthony. It felt like the beginning of something finally whole. 6 months after the wedding, Natalie sat at the small kitchen table in their new townhouse, hands shaking just slightly as she held a thin, white envelope. Lucas arrived first, bending to kiss her cheek. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, breath catching. "Yes, I wanted everyone here." Miguel rolled in from the living room. Anthony followed slowly, settling into a chair across from her. Natalie placed the sonogram gently on the table. For a moment, there was only silence. Then joy broke across the room like sunlight. Lucas pulled her into his arms. Miguel wiped his eyes. Anthony exhaled with a soft laugh that sounded almost like a prayer. A rebuilt life. A family made not by blood, but by loyalty, kindness, and survival. A future finally earned. And for the first time in a very long time, happiness didn't feel fragile. It felt real.